Better win for Dallas or worse loss for OKC? If you had to start with one of those two.
The win. I'm positive on this one. Maybe it's because of OKC's age, and it's certainly just a gut punch there to be in that moment where you're up and then you get the call. But Steve Javie did, I thought, a really good job of explaining like why it's actually still a foul, because he had the ball and reset was then going into a shot. Because I think when the ball's hit first, there's contact after. It can be really confusing for all of us.
By the way, I hate the rule. I think the rule should be if you hit the ball first and you could punch the guy in the face after. It's fine. Maybe I don't know. That next year NBA. I don't know. I felt like he got the ball.
Yeah.
He stopped it. I don't remember seeing that more than 5 times in my life.
I like the call because if you're strong enough to hold the ball to stay in a shooting position with it, and then you're fouled after, then you fouled me on the shot attempt. So, like, what are we doing? And then PJ steps up, and then obviously, I think you had to challenge it. I think you had to, even though that cost him the timeout with 2 seconds left. And now all of a sudden you're like, okay, great. And then PJ misses the free throw. So everything was really smart there by Dallas at the end. I just think it's so huge for Dallas, because of, hey, is this Kyrie thing really going to work out? I also think there is a Kyrie conversation that we would have had they lost this series. That it's like, hey, awesome quotes, but can you shoot more? Or can you not take off the first 24 minutes every night? Like it's some cool calculated thing. Because I don't really understand that. But once he turned it on again, he was really good. But he was taking 11 shots a game going into game 6. So I think collectively for me, Bill, I didn't watch that game last night going, oh my God, the Thunder have to be kicking their asses, because there were so many moments where you could see why they were losing. I just think it's a huge positive for Dallas for figuring out the pieces around Luka, the PJ part of it, the Gafford part of it, the Lively part of it, and then Kyrie feeling
Derek
like
Jones part of it.
Yeah, right. But then just
shit.
The Kyrie stuff is like for a season here, man. For a season, this has gone about as smooth as it's gone in years with him. So I thought it was well deserved.
Well, like we said in the retradables, they went all in on this. They either don't have picks and from 27 to 30, or they have the worst part of a pick swap. They went in on Kyrie, which I don't think anybody else in the league was like lining up to pay him.
No.
And they clearly were like, we have this window with Luka and we can't fuck around and we got to do everything possible. They identified the PJ Washington piece, that he was going to come in and be the guy that he's been, which I didn't see it. I didn't.
Well, no one saw him averaging like 20 plus.
No, but just like being this super comfortable corner 3 rebounder, defender, tough guy, not caring if he was going to score, selfless piece of a team. Didn't see it. I saw the Gafford. That made sense to me. Lively being that good as a rookie, especially in a big game where he was dominant down the stretch. They had Russillo. The last 2 games, they were plus 29 rebounding. But in the second halves of the last 2 games, they out-rebounded OKC 50-28. And there's some OKC stuff we have to go in there with that. But they had 16 rebounds in the fourth quarter of game 6. And OKC, I felt the whole series, I was like, I don't think Dallas's defense is that unbelievable. I think OKC's missing shots they've made all year. OKC scored on 8 of their last 11 possessions in game 6. And Shea hit some fucking nut crunch shots. They still lost. They lost because they couldn't get rebounds, but Lively and Gafford were 20 and 17 in game 5 and a 22 and 22 in game 6. Chet and the other Jalen Williams had 10 rebounds total in the last 2 games. And that was basically it. OKC couldn't get a rebound. It was over and over again. That one sequence when it was 105-101, offensive rebound, another misses the second free throw. They get another offensive rebound in the 3, and it was just like they just couldn't get rebounds. And Dallas was better. And I thought for the fact that Luka wasn't 100% and they were still able to do what they did, I thought it was a really impressive win by them. I was not a big believer in the Dallas team, but they certainly earned the respect of like, hey man, we don't know we're taping this before Denver, Minnesota, but they at least earned the respect of they're not going to be afraid of the next series, and the next series will be a battle, right?
Yeah, that's how I feel about them now, because I just felt like there were so many times over the course of the series where I'd just be watching and kind of go to my default, like, who's having an easier time? Just real simple question I ask myself whenever I'm watching a game. It's like, who's having an easier time?
Easier shots, easier pace, whole thing.
And it felt like SGA was just having to put the cape on all the time because all these guys around him fall apart, can't hit a shot in game 5. And, an offense that was off the charts in the regular season. It's the second best offense. You could argue it's the best shooting offense, depending on what you want to look at. But we knew the rebounding numbers were really, really bad. And, getting into the trade part of it and all the stuff that we've talked about, like we don't know who was actually available. And, people can look at the Presti resume now. It's like, okay, so I get it, but you think he's bad? You think he's bad at his job? Of course not. I don't think anybody that's being reasonable would say that he's bad at his job. And we did the trade deadline show right before the Super Bowl, and we led with Bogdanovich and talking about how wily the Knicks were, So
Right.
that's how bad the trade deadline was, because Bogdanovich was the headliner, unless you want to argue that the Thunder should have added somebody like a Siakam or somebody else.
I was upset about OKC.
Yeah, you were. And I think it was a glaring problem in considering all the assets. And then when you factor in the Dallas part of like helping facilitate that, like that's the part where it looks really arrogant and seems to be a problem. I wonder, they clearly need an on-ball guy. They need a third guy beyond Williams, who for his first playoff run, it's not shocking that he had some games where he had nothing there and just seemed to not be locked in. But they actually need like another guy. And I wondered if they thought Hayward was going to be that. But he was unplayable. I mean, if Dante Exum and Gordon Hayward played one-on-one, whoever had next would die because no one would shoot. You'd just be at the park being like, what happened? Be like, oh, he had next with Hayward and Exum. He just died.
The weird thing is there's so many swingmen available. They had all these assets. The trade was basically, so the OKC trades, they traded 12 to Dallas for 10 in Bertans. And Bertans was clearly a trade contract. Then they traded Bertans, Micic, and Trey Mann. They turned that into Hayward. But then they gave Dallas...
Get off the Micic number, too, because now they're 30-plus in cap space.
Yeah, but don't you think they could have given one of their 700 firsts or seconds to a team to take Micic and just kind of... Like, I don't feel like they had to do the Hayward trade to get rid of Micic. I don't get that.
Of course they could.
I just feel like...
If they
could have dumped it. He made like $7 million a year. It's not like he was at 40.
But I could just imagine Presti going, I don't want to have to pay some tax to move off of something. I wondered if they thought they'd get something from Hayward. But when you watched his minutes,
I think they did. Yeah, he was
like,
done.
this,
you could tell
this
right
guy
away.
Doesn't want to play right now.
Everyone in Charlotte was like, this he's washed. Like we were so psyched we got anything for him. The Dallas thing, the irony of Dallas just not having a first to trade for Gafford. OKC helping them out for this pick swap 4 years from now, and then Gafford ends up killing them. Also, like, what's Washington doing on that trade? Washington ended up with the 29th pick in the draft, this year's draft. That is the worst draft in 11 years. Why not just keep Gafford? I didn't understand that at all. But I went back. I was looking at all the OKC picks. They have the 12th pick this year from Houston. They have all of their own firsts through the decade, through 2030. They have a bunch of 25 stuff. Like they can swap for the best of Clips or Houston. They can also swap for a Philly top 6 protected. They have Miami's top 14 protected. 26, they have Houston top 4. They have a Clippers pick swap in 27. They have the Dallas pick swap. They have so much stuff. I just find it really hard to accept that they just felt like, oh no, this will be a learning experience this year. We're happy to be here. We can't believe this young team of upstarts made round 2 because Russillo, they're fucking in the spot in the KD era. They did the exact same thing where they didn't try to upgrade the team in that 2011 to 14 stretch other than the Jeff Green Perkins trade, which was like a lateral trade of younger guys. But they kind of sat in their lead with the thing. And they were like, we just want to be good every year. And I don't think you can have that mentality. Like, I really feel like they were one guy away from at least beating Dallas. They were a guy short.
Okay, but does that mean you think they should have gone in for OG? Should they have gone in for Siakam? Because once Toronto kind of pulled the plug on it earlier, and I don't know if that caught some franchises by surprise, because the scouting report of Toronto has always been like, they flirt with you, and then they never want to do anything.
Right.
And then maybe they felt a little burnt on the Van Vliet thing where it's like, well, we can't have this happen again where you have 2 guys going to free agency and not getting any assets. And Toronto's like, all right, let's just pull the plug.
And Toronto wanted players, which I think OKC had the pick. So I don't know if that works as well. But Siakam is somebody they had the assets to get.
Yeah, it's kind of back to like the original thing of like who do you want, but who's available? And my guess is that Presti just looked around and was like, well, all these guys that are available, like we're pretty good or whatever. But then it just looks brutal. It looks brutal when you look at the rebounding numbers. It looks brutal when Jalen Williams is your only other big option, to not have like a third guy who's just big, who at least allowed you, if they had gotten through this, to go like, what the hell are they going to do against Minnesota if Minnesota wins tonight? What were they going to do against Denver? I mean, can you imagine Jokic against Chet 7 games?
Chet looked like he was 180 pounds by the end of round 2.
We all love Chet. We love Chet, but when you watch him closely around the rim, especially like over the course of the game in a series,
can't get rebounds.
It's like run blocking. You know, like, hey, how come they're doing this, or how come they're running this play? And it's like, because these guys are paying a price now, a bill that's going to come due in the fourth quarter, and we need to keep running the football. We need to keep doing this. I always feel like whenever you're watching Chet around the rim, you just see him, this toll that he has paid through the first 2 hours of the game,
right?
Where it's asking him to do a lot as a rookie with his frame. So
it was nuts.
We agree.
If you flip Gafford, if Gafford is on OKC in this series instead of Dallas, that's a what if for me. If I'm an OKC fan, I'm thinking about that all summer. It's like, why the fuck didn't we get Gafford? Instead, we helped Dallas get Gafford. They beat us. It's a rough one. I have this whole thing I did that I'm not going to do in the pod. I went through every OKC the last 7 years at Durant. Presti just doesn't make trades, is the reality. It's very rare for him. Like, he made that Perkins trade. He made the James Harden trade.
But the Harden trade, remember too, is that ownership.
It was a financial thing. But I'm just saying that was an actual trade he made.
Right. They screwed that up though, because they could have just wrote it out for another year. Considering what they got back for Harden.
They absolutely blew it.
Right. None of us thought Harden was going to end up becoming a guy who won MVPs. I did.
But it was a dumb trade.
Right.
They should have just paid Harden.
It still was a really stupid trade, because you just go to ownership and go, hey, I know what you don't want to do, but we just pay them and we'll figure it out later. Okay, we'll figure it out later, because ultimately they were going to have to, like, I don't know, man. That whole thing.
But to me, it's like the Mookie Betts trade, where they liked what they got. That was part of the trade. They're like, well, we'll price Harden stats with Kevin Martin. We have this project with Jeremy Lamb. We're going to get this awesome pick, which turned out to be Steven Adams, right? And they were like, we're going to be at least the same if we do this trade. That was the piece they missed. I
think I remember that too. Daryl he told Zach Lowe, it's like, well, we told them we wouldn't have done this deal a year from now. It's like, oh yeah, no way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we definitely would turn down James Harden. In 2015, they traded a first for Deion Waiters. They traded Perk and Reggie Jackson and a first for Enes Kanter and DJ Augustine.
Yeesh.
And then in February 2016, they traded Augustine and Steve Novak for Randy Foye. Those were all the trades Presti made during the last 7 years Durant was on the team. So he's a little more hesitant. What's interesting, though, the summer of 2016, before Durant left, that was when he traded Ibaka to Orlando for Oladipo and the rights to Sabonis, which was a fucking awesome trade. And I do wonder, like, if there's no Golden State cap spike and KD just signs a 1-year deal to stay there in 2017, and they would have had Oladipo and Sabonis and Steven Adams and Kanter and Russ again, and maybe like that team, there's another sliding doors where that team might have been the best team in the league, but we'll never know.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you're saying Presti won't do it, but they don't have these moments of boldness.
But why didn't he have the moment of boldness this year? Yeah. He should have learned from the past. It's like,
right, he traded for Paul
I have
George.
Gilgeous-Alexander. He's the top 4 guy in the league.
When he did the Oladipo deal for Paul George, people were like, okay, but, what are you going to do? But then you don't realize, like, Paul George, if you throw him a party on the night of free agency that he feels like he has to go to, then he signs with
4 years.
Then he's going to leave.
Can I give you one other thing from this series that I thought, because it was like, man, Jones and Washington played really well, right? Then you look at the stats. PJ Washington in the first 4 games, 87 points, 19 for 37, 3-point field goal. The last 2 games, Derek Jones had 41 points and was 7 for 11 from 3. These guys, Derek Jones is a career 31% 3-point shooter. PJ Washington's a career 32% 3-point shooter. So if you're Dallas, you're like, man, if we could just hit on 2 of these on this wing position, just one guy a game can come through. Just one. Exum, like whoever it is, just please, one guy come through? Just DJ and PJ. If you just take their best games for the 6 games, they were 21.3 points a game, 53% from three. And that and the rebounds swung the series for them because, and there's one other thing, because we should have talked about him sooner. 64-48, OKC had a ton of momentum. Luka just, some of the shots he makes that are sometimes bad threes, sometimes they're like he's rolling into the lane like Jokic, but he always has a sense of timing for this game slipping away. I need to do something. And he did that, I thought, over and over again in the especially game 6. Just has a sense of like, they need me right now, I'm going to do it. And that's why he's so dangerous in this next round. He has 2 playoff runs now of experience, especially on the road, where he knows like, doesn't matter where we play, I'm not going to be afraid. I'll know where to get my spots. So we'll see what happens with Denver, Minnesota tonight. But 2 weeks ago versus now, I feel differently about this Dallas team.
Yeah, and I think Luka looked better as the series went along. You figure the 3-point shooting had to get better. I don't know when I did the numbers. It might have been after game 5 where I was like, okay, well, wait, like what's going on? Is Luka getting deep enough? Like there's so many times you look at him where you just feel like he can get really deep and then he's just working and he can do the step back. He can do some kind of up and under. He can throw it. He can skip it or he can throw it to his corner. And I don't know that I was seeing that from him enough. And, look, I think Oklahoma City did some really good things defensively, but once he knew Dort had 5 and they tried to like get a couple Cason Wallace possessions against him, it was just like, okay, So Luka, look, I think he's the second best player in the world. And, it's kind of what you'd expect from him in closing this thing out. And I feel like with Dallas here now, I mean, I can't wait to see what happens. I cannot wait to see what happens tonight. Like this series hasn't been close, but it's so much fun.
But we're due for a close one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you mentioned this earlier, but if you're OKC, you leave that series and it's devastating, but you feel better about SGA as like a real guy, especially those last couple games where, you go sideways unless he's like, oh, I'm a top 5 guy in the world too. I'll match these baskets. It's going to be interesting to see him in the Olympics because he, to me, now has the gravitas to be in any situation against any team and know he can get to the spot. I thought he got to the spots he wanted the whole series, and his team just wasn't consistently good enough around him. They never really figured out their 5 either, because if they need a little more scoring, it was Isaiah Joe. If they want a little more defense, they would put somebody else in. And I thought it's weird to say this, but I thought they missed Giddey's rebounding. I know Giddey was had become a sunk cost to them to some degree, but Giddey was like he's like a 7 rebounds a game guy. And I wonder, like, did they handle that one correctly where they basically lost confidence in him and vice versa midway through the series?
They were scrambling, and the problem is the Giddey thing just got worse and worse. And, they had talked about how like, hey, we're still getting good looks. And then there was one game, I remember some of the guys are saying like, hey, we still won the Giddey minutes or whatever. And you're like, okay, yeah, but like, how does it look?
Yeah.
And trying to make SGA try to figure this out with him out there, his game 4 deal where, they came back in that game too, where, they're down and they outscored him 35-27. SGA goes for 34. He hit 10 of 14 mid-ranges, which is the most in a playoff game since Chris Paul did it 5 years ago. So there were just these things that SGA was doing. We're in agreement because like moving forward is like, all right, I know they lost in the second round, but like it has nothing to do with him. Just a bunch of guys ended up with the ball in their hands that weren't ready. And Wallace had hit a couple threes, I think in game 4.
Game 4,
and you were like, okay, well, maybe there's something there. And it's like, okay, maybe there also isn't.
Right. Maybe he's 20 years old.
Right. And as good as he's been this year, and it looks like Presti hit on another pick. And I can't get past like some of the Jalen Williams moments where it's like, dude, and maybe this is just his bad series. Brunson had a bad series early on with the Mavs. I brought up the SGA series with OKC when Chris Paul was there with Schroeder, and it looked like he wasn't entirely comfortable. And granted, the ball's going to end up in those other guys' hands a little bit more, and that's fine. But for this series, SGA, this depth, this shooting, and this offense around him didn't even look close. And I still think as much as we all like Chet, you're not running a play for Chet. Maybe it's a lob. Maybe it's him trailing something and hitting a three. I mean, he had the huge free throws and the huge three in that game 4. So all of us should feel good about it. But like they gotta do something, because it'll be funny to see what happens this offseason.
Well, they're gonna trade Giddey. Giddey will be traded. That's the one thing we know. He's getting traded.
I saw the mutual interest with Utah thing, which I was just kind of like an awesome wording.
Yeah, that's almost like a Mad Libs. Can we mention? I should have mentioned this earlier, because if I was an OKC fan, I'd be so mad about the Gafford thing. The other thing I'd be mad about.
You're mad about it as a non-fan.
I'm not. I don't even care. Right. I literally don't care about OKC. The other thing that would drive me nuts. They played really good defense on Luka on that last play. They're up 1. Luka ends up, can't get the shot he wants, and kind of dribbles over to where PJ Washington is and just throws it to him and basically fucks him. He's in the corner, right? And then PJ Washington has to take the game-deciding shot of the game, right? He didn't even have a point in the first 3 quarters, and takes a shot where SGA is coming at him and is close enough to him that he can put his hand on the ball and block it and then hit him after. But what a crazy way to lose your season. You did everything right. Even SGA's play, he did that right. And then you still lose. That play would drive me nuts. And so would that 4-point sequence with 4 minutes left. I was just like, oh my God. But Dallas, Dallas over and over again was making the plays. That's why they won the series. All 4 of their games were pretty close at some point in the last 12, 10 minutes, and they pulled all of them out. Playoff experience, Russillo.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, man, the fouling on the 3-point line with these guys, it was going to be such a tough shot, but it's so much to ask a player to just deny their instincts of contesting the shot, especially when it's a game winner to potentially eliminate you from the playoffs. Like, you're going to, but it's like, make him make it, man. Make him make it. And he still was clean on top. But once Javi explained it, I was like, that actually makes a lot of sense, because you shouldn't be able to foul him after he resets with the ball in his hands. But look, 6 games, it could have been 5 if SGA doesn't go crazy in 4, if Chet doesn't hit the corner 3. These things have a way of balancing. But over the course of watching these 2 teams play 6 times, we did not get a result that wasn't deserving. Dallas was the better team, and I thought their secondary guys were consistently better than OKC's.
I'm with you. The better team won. OKC was freaking close, and they'll think about it all summer. I want to see what they do. They got to figure out, is that Jalen Williams spot a real spot? Is that really going to be our backup center rebounder guy, or are we going to try somebody else there? They got to figure out, can we turn Giddey into another wing? And then what do we do with these draft picks? Do we want to really go in on somebody? But it's funny, like, I'm frustrated that OKC didn't do enough. And yet Dallas, it's almost seemed reckless how much they did. And that was what paid off. And it was great, right? I mean, Dallas was all in. There was no outs with everything they did. If this didn't work, now it's like, we made conference finals. We have a real chance to potentially beat next round. This all worked. But that's why you got to go for it sometimes, Russillo.
If Kawhi's healthy and the Clippers get through them, which is not a crazy assumption.
Yeah.
Maybe Dallas still beats them. But, how annoying we can all be after the results. It'd be like, dude, and then they moved that, and then they paid for PJ. Like, you didn't even get out of the first round. But I think they were kind of desperate to prove something here to Luka. And here we are.
And they did.
Yeah.
My last thing, PJ Washington, who I had really not a ton of opinions on, because I wasn't sitting around, watching the Hornets over and over again for the last few years. He's just such a fun playoff guy. I love when guys turn into playoff guys, when you have no idea out of nowhere. DiVincenzo's like that too, I think. These guys where in the lights with the pace and the intensity of a game, and certain guys, for some reason, they make more sense in games like that. He's definitely one for me. And it was not somebody I would have expected, but they saw it. Kudos to them.